Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar. We're just about ready to kick off, another 30 seconds or so while we let a few more people come in. While we're waiting, we'll do the usual sound check. Can I confirm, if I can, through a show of hands, can you hear me and can you see our screen with a PowerPoint up? Yep, I see lots of hands going up. Sound check coming through just fine. Brilliant. We'll kick off. Great to see everyone join us today. Today's session is all about Syspros, E.NET Solutions and Business Objects Explained. We're going back to basics. If that's not what you're here for, you're welcome to join us in the next session. I'm sure, though, you'll get lots of value out of today. Today, I'm really happy to have join with me today Andrew Rudd, one of our automation and integration consultants. Hello, Andrew. Good to see you.
Hello. Afternoon.
Andrew's been with us for 8 3/4 years. If you know Andrew, the 3/4 is very particularly important. We were debating between 3/4 and 11/12, I believe. A number of you will have worked with Andrew over the years. He's specifically great at working towards integration and leveraging what we're going to be talking about today to make life simpler for businesses. I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Darshnee Shah. I'm the product manager here with Nexus, been in and around the Syspro ecosystem for far longer than I care to admit, but I've been here in the UK for the last 5 years. Really happy to have everyone join us today. So before we kick off, I want to talk a little bit about some of the business problems. And they're old, they're new. Fundamentally, we've got businesses with individual business units. Lots of things going on within individual businesses. This probably is similar to what you're working on. You've got individual areas where you've got units. You might have engineering. They're busy entering CAD drawings. That's not feeding into Syspro. You may have a sales team going out there and quoting. That may not be feeding directly into Syspro, looking at what stock you have on hand. You may be looking at production, doing receipting, and nothing on the data floor is getting captured, perhaps through mobile devices. So having different systems is always a challenge, and having them integrated is always the dream. Having different business processes is also another challenge that we have going on, and that's associated with automation. There's always a way that we want to move forward and do things a little bit better. Now, one of the things that I keep hearing about and reading about in the newspaper is the skills shortage, and the UK is particularly poignantly feeling this, where we've got people that have left businesses. We don't necessarily have individuals that are skilled up in businesses and are not able to hire up. I'm really curious, actually, for a quick show of hands, how many people have current vacancies that they have listed up there? Okay, not too many vacancies. So it sounds like the skill shortages isn't hitting today's audience. Automation, though, is something that we definitely still look at improving and integrating. So one of the typical examples we go through is when we have sister businesses. We've got a production environment, we've got a distribution environment. Distribution feeds orders into production, who are then fulfilling it and selling it back out. There are various touch points that we have across both sister businesses. You've got individuals in the distribution entering orders in. You've got individuals in manufacturing that are receiving those, raising their own purchases and sales orders, manufacturing to then go ahead and fill that cycle. You've got human beings entering all that information, where an automated flow would make things a lot simpler. Fewer touch points from a human being, fewer chances of getting errors involved, and more real-time information and input. All of this is always tied in with the importance of having security. We spend so much time implementing rules within our business systems. Syspro is being configured specifically to your business needs. You've got users, you've got security, all of that you want to adhere to as well. And if we look out, McKinsey has a report that talks about why integration is a priority for 96% of organizations and CIOs in particular. When we drill down into that, there's a breakdown. 56% are worried because of data quality. We don't have individuals that are going ahead and entering information in manually. We don't have necessarily pieces of paper anymore. You want to drive data integration projects. You don't want that across different systems and silos. And that's where 38% are focusing, because they want to be able to aggregate data to start making sensible business decisions. So you have leaders within your business or yourself that are looking for information that's currently sitting across 3 systems. How much better would it be if it was in one where you're able to have that system pull out and give you the information that you need on a timely basis rather than a week later? And then finally, 50% of organizations are looking at automation tools and technologies to improve and speed up that interoperability. So I just wanted to set the scene, but really that's not what we're here for. We want to hear a little bit more about the tools that we have in Syspro to help drive that better. And for that, I'm going to hand over to Andrew, talk a little bit about Syspro E.NET and business objects.
Hello. So most of you probably know, use and are aware very much of the Syspro user interface, and that basically sits on our Syspro database. Some of you probably tinker around and do bits of power tailoring. So this is customizing the screens and adding bits and things. But there's also another part of that that's VB script and a bit more enhanced power tailoring that just gives us additional things. And by the use of power tailoring, we can help simplify, excuse my words, we can help simplify and automate some of the tasks that's restricted when it's driven by user actions front end. So on top of our Syspro sort of arc, we basically have our business objects, and these work along the side of the Syspro user interface and follow the same Syspro validation to get data into and out of Syspro. So some of these can be fairly light touch, so we can use bits of power tailoring or other products to be like a light touch data collection tool. So we can use it to capture data and then post it via the business object to get it in. But we also have other tools at our disposal. So on top of that, we have our WCF surface, and then we have various products that we can be used to call these. And some of these are either data collection or a bit more no touch type products like data switch, or even Espresso and workflow that work and do a lot more in the background without requiring that user input. So an example of like a light touch would be a stock take capture. So actually we can either use Translution or Espresso, where the users have a mobile type device or even a spreadsheet that they populate the stock code and quantity, and then we can use the Syspro business objects to get that back in to Syspro and post it as a stock take capture. And then other than that, so if we're talking a no touch type process, we potentially use data switch, but workflow could do the same, where off the back of a sales order being raised in Syspro, we start a process that it creates a matching PO in the same company for all those quantities. And then if you've got a second Syspro company, we pass the transfer on. So we then raise a sales order in our manufacturing company. And all of that happens just, no touch, using the business objects to get the data into Syspro. And that all follows the business objects using the same logic as the front end Syspro. So if we're trying to place sales orders for customers that are on hold, we get an error message that says customer on hold. And it just follows all that same logic. So they're really useful for getting validated data into Syspro. And the business objects themselves are driven by using the XML format. So it's been around for years. And the Syspro business objects have been around since Syspro 6 issue 6. It was released in 2003. So they've stood the test of time. And quite a lot of the business objects, the original ones, are using pretty much the same XML to pass it in from the first version to now. There's a few extra nodes and bits of additional information. So actually your customization from 2003, we still have some of it in operation with minimal changes up to the latest Syspro 8, because the business objects just had not needed that changes because the XML's just stood the test of time. So yeah, we've mentioned a few of the products. So there's Equator, Translution, and Data Switch. And they're just a few of the different products that we use that call our business objects. So what can we do with our business objects? So the first part of it is we can log on, but actually that goes through the authentication of validating that the user's a Syspro user and they've been granted the permissions to log on. Then we have our setup and our master data. So we can add and remove fairly static data. So a lot of this is we can update stock codes or add customers, remove customers, maintain a lot of our static data. So we can either update descriptions, add customers, or even remove customers if they've not had a sale and everything's been archived correctly. So as well as that, we also have the some query business objects. So these are generally a lot of the information within Syspro. If you've got access to the SQL database, you can query, but the query business objects are quite valuable in a couple of times. So if we're wanting to get like sales order or purchase order values, if you've got lots of discounts and complicated pricing and currencies going on, it can be quite difficult to calculate those within SQL. So actually the business objects and calling those actually do all of that Syspro logic of values in the background. And it's the same with like a best price query. So if you have a customer and a specific stock code, actually it will apply the best price it can find based on your discount structures. And then moving on, we also have the transactional business objects. And these are a bit more about getting transactional data into Syspro. So this can be the creation of sales orders, receipting jobs, issuing materials to jobs. Pretty much most of the transactions that are available within Syspro, you can do via a business object. And more of the newer functionality of Syspro, there's more business objects available. And some of this as well, we can break down the process. So if we have a sales order, we can raise a sales order header in one step, and then we can add additional lines to it as separate steps. So you can just break up that functionality and maintain it a bit better. Yeah, so what is available? So we have a couple of places where we can find out what business objects we have available. So the first one, so on the Syspro Info Zone website, there is a development tools and a business object library. And this has all our information about, what is a business object, what is a functional area. So the functional area are the areas of business objects that you can have. So these are accounts payable, primary posting, is various different ones. So we can, do an invoice posting. But if we go for our setup ones, so let me just find our customer one that we were looking at. So within a setup functional area, we have our accounts receivable customer maintenance business object. So this will be to either add, update, or delete a customer. Now, if you follow that one through, so it takes us to the short description, an overview of the object. So it gives us a various thing of what it can be used for, what it can't be, what might need to be ticked on. And then we can see any prerequisites as well. And a very, bit more detail of what can and can't be done by the business object. So that one's sort of our functional one. And also within here, if you're wanting to see what the business object requires, so we can have a look at the doc, which is the XML in. So that's what we pass into the business object, but we can also have the XSD, which is the description of those fields as well. So what each node within that XML is used for and what values it accepts. Yeah. So if we go back to our thing, so as well as so that's a setup one. So if we have a look at a query one, let's do best. So we've got sales order, best pricing query. So again, it's the same. We can see what the XML will go through and see what our input XML is. And that's it. So we pass in a price group, stock code, currency, and various bits. And then if we want to do a raising of a sales order, if we look in our sales order primary posting functional area, too many sales order input. So again, we've got our sales order input one, sales order input, and this one's been around since version 6.1 of Syspro, so probably saw on some of the others, been around a long time. Again, the overview, functionality, and our explanation of the XML in. So there's all sorts of things that relate to sales orders as you would expect front end. So you get that same validation happening with the business objects. Yeah. So as well as looking in the business object library and where we can see our functional areas, there's another place we can look, and this one's actually on your Syspro server. So if we look where our Syspro is installed in the Syspro base directory, there's a file called the businessobjects.xml. So if we just open that with the Notepad. So again, we have the same, and we can sort of search in here a bit like we did with a Control F, and we can find, so it was, what do we want to look for? Oop. Sorry, I've jumped off. Job close. Let's see. So if I'd have typed job close in there, we wouldn't be able to find it. So some of the names, you just need to be a little bit careful on what you're searching. So a job closure, so this would be to post the variances after a job has been completed by production. So if there's any manufacturing variances to expected. Yeah.
I like the fact that this particular file lists all of the business objects you have available for your version as well, whereas what we're looking at on the info zone is something that would be available across all. So if you're sitting on a slightly older version of Syspro, when you look at this particular file, you're going to see this listing only the ones that you have access to, whereas when you're upgrading, you get access to all of them as well in the latest release.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Cool. So once we've got our business object that we need to call, to find it on your system, the XML to use, if we look in our, sorry, try and open my folder again. So if we go into the base schemas folder, this is where if we search the business object in here, so sortoy was our sales order transaction order input business object, we can see we get to the same files that we could see on the info zone. So if we look in the sortoy.xml, we should see in here, we get our same XML in. And again, it's the same with the XSD, is the explanation of that. So we get the same explanations. Yeah. So then we'll just move on. So how is it licensed? So within Syspro, if you are calling the business objects from within Power Tailoring, so within VB scripts and other bits, actually you have access to all the business objects and they're all included. So yeah, you can basically lock up a custom pane that posts WIP issues and have it within Syspro, and there's no licensing implications. If, however, you're using third-party products, we have some that actually are included at the runtime, so we have access to all of the business objects. So Espresso, Workflow, and Data Switch have access to the whole portfolio of business objects. And then we have some products that are outside of the Syspro standard products and Translution that are more a la carte licensing. And by this, we mean they have access to one or two function areas, and these are licensed separately. So if we were doing a WIP primary posting, so if we were wanting to do a job receipt, you would have WIP primary posting functional area licensed, of which there's all of these business objects part of it. So job creation, material allocations, labor, and all the other bits here. But you wouldn't, for that functional area, get access to sales orders. You would need the sales order primary posting functional area. So it's licensed within all these separate functional areas.
I think the one thing to mention around the a la carte licensing as well is the fact that it's not tied to your Syspro ERP user count, because of course you're integrating to Syspro, and so they come in bundles of 10. You don't necessarily, if you're using 30 Syspro users, you don't have to have 30 business object functional areas licensed as well. You could just use the 10 because of course you're using automation in the background. Perfect, thanks.
Cool, thank you. So a few different ways that we call our business objects when they get used. So as we said, so Syspro Power Tailoring, it calls the business object directly within the Syspro client. So what that means is if you are, if you have a business object call to do something, actually you will be waiting I know, half a second while it processes the business object and returns the data. And then our external products, so I'm saying external as in external to Syspro, but internal within their network, they call the Syspro WCF service. And these are fairly direct calls, so we don't need to set up any firewalls to allow access from outside the building. And because these are products that are generally installed within your network. So data switch, Translution, other such things. So this would generally be, and we're sort of the more lighter touch and no touch processing. So data switch, there's a little bit of administration, but in general it works in the background. Equator, it's the getting in and receipting of jobs. Translution's a data collection, same as Espresso, and workflow works fairly silently in the background as well. And these are generally direct calls to the WCF service. And then we sort of have a third class of type calls that are our external connections. So these are external website APIs and bespoke applications, and these are external to the network. So this use the same WCF service, but the port needs to get opened up to the various parties to be able to access and call it. Yeah. So then we've got another little there's another tool that we use when we're talking about business objects quite often. And this is called .NET Diagnostics. So we'll just go through and run a bit of a demo on this one as well. So this is what it is. And it's basically a business object tester. So what we have is we can log in. So when we do our login, we specify the service we want to the service we want to log into. So this is my service that I've got. And then we also pass in our username and company and passwords. So then when we log in, we should hopefully get our session ID back. So this is the login session ID we've got. Yeah. And then what it is also good for, so we were looking for our XML in the business objects or on the InfoZone website. This is also really good for finding XML. So we select a different business object, it'll give us the XML and also the parameters that we need to pass along with it. So if I go back to, now can't find it, sales order input. So as well as our sales orders and the XML being passed in, we can also pass in parameters. And these are a bit more like what you will configure as your setup in Syspro. So actually, is it only work for a specific customer? is there a specific list of warehouses you can place orders for? Type of order, whether it's order or scheduled or forward, and the order status to use. So there's all sorts of things we can pass in additional to the XML and configure via the parameters. And as well as passing in the whole XML and knowing what all the nodes are, we can actually pass in quite a cut down version. So let me just find my XML that I had from earlier. So that you can see on screen at the moment is the full XML for raising a sales order and all the nodes available. But a lot of that isn't required because the ship address is always the same. All the details about products are all the same. So actually, we can cut a lot of that down to a lot more minimal of basically passing a customer PO, customer name, customer code, stock code, quantity, price. So it's a fairly cut down list. Yeah. So then when we invoke our business object, what we can see is that the business object logic's been applied. We don't have any stock of B100. So the order's been placed on back order and it returns it as a warning. And it's also giving us our sales order number that's been created. So we've got sales order number 909. Yeah. So let's just jump to, I'm saying that, yeah. Let's jump to Syspro and go sales order query, 909. There we go. We've got B100, quantity 5 on back order for customer number 10. Yeah. So what is possible with the business object? So actually, when we talk about fully automated and no input processes, we can do quite a lot, but it all depends what we're trying to do. So in this instance, actually fairly, I don't know, quick run through of like a web shop interface of what business objects we might call. So we can receive any form of input from our website. So it could be a file, it could be an API call to something, it could be whatever translating it. And then we can go straight into our business, sorry, don't know what fit there. Then we can go straight into a business object post to raise the sales order. Off the back of that, we could create a zero value debit note, and then we could post a payment against the debit note. And this is basically so because a web shop will probably have taken the payment up front. So accounts want to show that you have that payment. It's not necessarily yet in your bank account, but it is on its way because it'll, by the time whoever Sage Pay or whatever transfer you the money, it will come through. So the customer has paid. So that account is no longer in debit. And then off the back of the goods being shipped and then invoiced, once we get our sales order invoice created, actually off the back of that, we can look in and contra the payment we just made against the debit note to the AR invoice, so the invoice is then paid. And then we can also do another business object that performs the cash book bank deposit. So actually all those funds appear in our bank so that when you get the statement from whoever the web shop thing, Sage Pay or whoever, you can reconcile it direct to the bank and just tick off, yeah, we've got all of those payments, they all match. There we go. And off the back of that, we can send in a file or a acknowledgement to the website saying, yeah, we've dispatched your goods. There you go. So for a lot of this is, no human interaction required for that sort of processes. And they're just, business objects being chained to build up a bit more of what your manual process is. Yeah.
All right, thanks, Andrew, for taking us on the whistle stop tour. Fundamentally, business objects They're really there to extend your capabilities. It's about simplifying engagement for your end users. It's about expanding and pulling in data from multiple business systems into Syspro, and it's about making things even faster. It's about automating, especially improving efficiencies related to that. But you're doing all of that while you're sticking to your business rules. And as Andrew mentioned, business objects are and have been around the Syspro ecosystem for a long time. The idea of APIs and open APIs is relatively new in the tech term in terms of the language associated with that, but it's been around for a long time, and Syspro was one of the early adopters of this technology. It's interesting because I used to work with a partner in Canada who commented about 10 years ago how robust Syspro's integration layer has been, and E.NET Solutions is the foundation of all of that, where because it adheres to standards, the solution is actually future fit, makes upgrades far simpler, and it allows you to integrate and have the data coming into Syspro while adhering to all of the business rules and continuing to allow your users to enter information into Syspro. So it works in conjunction with. And I really think that that in together brings a lot of benefits in. So we've talked at you for a little while. It's time for us to get your opinion. But before we do that, I do want to share some links, and I do see a question that's come through as well. If you want to know more, what Andrew did show you was the business objects library. We've got a link to that. There are some guides that drive a little bit deeper into the functional areas that we talked about, the actual XML, the calling of it, the customization and power tailoring. And because data switch, when integrating to Syspro, is such a key portion of how most of the customers here in the UK engage with and automate, I've also got a link to the portal. So I'm going to send that through in the chat for you to be able to have access to. Feel free to go ahead and pull that through. And as I promised, I want to get a bit of a better sense. We've had a whistle-stop tour. It's been a short webinar specifically because of that, but I want to know, now that we've done this, will you add business objects to your arsenal of tools? Do you already use them? Are you going to start using them? Not really, or maybe. I can already see votes coming in. That's great. Thanks, guys. 67% have voted already. We're almost there. 85%, and so I will look to close in 5, 4, 3, 2. Great. So it looks like 61% are already using them. 35% are going to start using them, and 4% are undecided. Great. Thanks very much for that. Now, at this point, I want to open the floor up to any questions that you may have. If you've got what you need, you want to get on with the rest of your day, thank you very much for joining us. Otherwise, please use the chat functionality, send us questions. We've got a good 20 minutes to be able to help you with that, because I know that this is a broad topic and we just touched the iceberg. So I've got a question, Andrew, that's already come in. I think it's actually alluding to one of the slides that you had on there, and I think it's an important question. Where can I find more information about the REST API via the web? So for example, how would an online SaaS app post a REST command to Syspro on-premise?
I imagine, and I'm not, I would probably start by going through the info zone and looking through the developer toolkit of what is on there. That's primarily the first point of call with those sort of calls.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll follow that up with a little bit of documentation as well. So one of the things we alluded to is the fact that there's a WCF service layer that's coming in and around the business objects, and fundamentally that's how the communication happens. There's no reason why that WCF service can't be exposed to the outside. There's security reasons and all of those challenges as well, but we can go ahead and configure that in order to be able to make those REST API calls and then access to all of the business objects. So happy to share some documentation on that. depending on the version of Syspro you're on, the terminology may change a little bit in the way that you integrate. The other way to look at it also is potentially if you're currently using Data Switch, we find that a lot of customers do that and abstract one more layer beyond that. So hopefully that answers the question a little bit further, but happy to follow through with some documentation as well. Perfect. I've got another question here. Can I use an existing Syspro API to integrate with Workfront? Not quite sure I understand the question, so perhaps we just want to get a little bit of clarification around Workfront. Andrew, does Workfront make sense to you directly?
I'm not quite, if I'm imagining that there is already an integration built with Workfront and calling an API, you've probably already got the connection in place to call a Syspro business object. So I imagine there's no harm in reusing that same methodology, but I don't know what the, yeah.
Okay, well, we can definitely pick that up offline if you want to clarify the question as well. Not sure if we've lost the person who's asked the question as well. Can't quite see a clarification on there. Question for you, Andrew. You've been in and around the Syspro ecosystem here at Nexus for about 8¾ years, as we said earlier.
11/12.
11/12. Is in your experience in and around business objects, what percentage of the integration and automation that you do is in and around business objects?
90. I mean, I'm saying that, if not a bit higher. It's a lot of it's around the collection of data to get to a business object point. So unless it's an export out for a website, that sometimes it's a business object, but a lot of the time we're just using SQL to get our data and then give an export out. Anything you're trying to get into Syspro, we always go via a business object. So any data coming in, pretty much, and even then, most of what I end up doing with power of tailoring is, yeah, once we get to the point that we know we need to do something a bit more whizzy, that we've got a custom pane that needs to post this, that's got a bit more logic and meat to it than, yeah, just a few little tiny macros that do stuff. So the majority of what I do is probably, yeah, 90%, I would say, of the work I do involves business objects.
That's a pretty high percent, and I do like business objects because they honor all the business rules. They're still sticking to the logic that you have, whereas if you're going directly into SQL tables, that abstraction layer really doesn't happen. The chances of mixing something up that's not upgrade proof becomes a lot higher as well. So I'm quite happy with that percentage.
And that's what, in general, although, yeah, our versions of Data Switch have slightly upgraded. So we've got a more modern front now, and the way it works in the background is a bit more efficient. Actually, the business object side of that just hasn't changed. They're all the same calls, so we don't need to make any changes. The only one that has changed is the custom form business object that moved from a setup business object to a transaction business object when you went from 6 to 7. So they're the only ones that, within my memory, have changed from 6 to 7 in type. And that's partially because of the table changes, because custom forms became more popular, so they needed to split it out. So other than that, the business object calls themselves are pretty much all the same across all the versions.
Yeah. No, they are definitely. Okay, we've got a little bit more clarification. So actually, this is a good question, and I think we want to elaborate on that a little bit. The ports explicit to business objects, is there a list of ports that need opening related to a specific business object?
So, and it's probably a slight misunderstanding of what I was trying to explain. So the Syspro WCF is how, I'm assuming we're going from external applications, whether that be internally on your network or within, someone you've granted to. So it's based around the port number of the Syspro WCS service that you have installed. And 3006, I think is the default Syspro port now.
And it is configurable per site as well.
Yes, yeah. So that's configurable. So that depends on the site, but that would be your starting point for the port to open. Look what your Syspro WCF is, and that's how you then configure. But if you are allowing that port access externally, you generally do some form of mapping to map it to whatever port number you want to get shared through the firewalls and stuff like that. So it's all dependent on what your Syspro WCF is, because that's your route into the business objects from external applications.
But you're not breaking it down where each business object has its own unique port, because all of the business objects will come in.
So that's where, and let me just show my screen. So when I logged on, let me just hit the right buttons if we can. Sorry, my mouse is being silly. That's where we saw our service settings. This is our base address. So this is my thing, and this is the port. Say I got the number wrong. 31,001 is my port number. So that's the port that I'm logging onto that would need to be open for my instance of Syspro.
Perfect, and that's the default port that's there, and clearly you would want to have a layer of security in and around that as well, because you don't want to have external access to a port without that security.
Yeah.
Perfect. I've got a nice high-level question. What is the best way to get support in implementing these types of automations? It's a great question.
So it all depends, and some of it comes down to what you're doing. So a lot of if you have a panache for a bit of development, actually you might be able to do some of these things yourself, but that doesn't mean it's always the best way to go. So for some of I know for quite a lot of our customers who have a bit of development experience, actually they would get a consultant in for the first day or a day or two to basically bottom out what the process is trying to do, and then map it and give a bit more high-level training in what you're trying to do. And then once you've got that, you can go away and build. But actually, the key with a lot of bigger processes and some of these processes is understanding the pitfalls to avoid. It's not necessarily the technical capabilities, it's knowing, actually, if we're doing this, you're better doing it this way because of whatever reasons. So a lot of the time, you're probably best starting with some form of consultancy, but whether that be consultancy for us to build a process or for even you to build it, all depends on what level of support you require, really.
Yeah, and that's a good point. When you're starting out, the documentation is great because it gives you a level of understanding and education. But then it's when you're getting into the actual building of it is where the consultation actually comes in, because you've got a real life example that you can work through that makes it a lot richer, which is why we don't have a standard course that we offer up specifically in and around developing applications. There is one around data switch, which goes into some elements of this, but business objects are only a component of that, because clearly there's a lot more that you can do with that particular solution. So if you are looking at automating, then that's possibly a place to start as well.
But some of that, and alongside that, sort of fits knowing what tools are available.
Correct.
So where we have a site of the tools we have available. So actually certain processes actually you're better using translution for, some of them data switch, some of them power tailoring, and that's just dependent on what you're trying to achieve, dependent on what the tool is we would recommend using and building and going forward with that.
Looks like we've bottomed out some of the questions. We do have a few people that are still in on the call, so feel free to throw any additional questions that are there. If not, we'll look to wrap up in a couple of minutes.